Thank you, choir, especially enjoyable piece. Craig, I enjoyed watching you direct. Quite lively. Some of you may be a little tired today. You know, I didn't go to LSU, and I don't know what my investment is in that football team, but that game yesterday just about wore me out. Yeah, it's a miracle. A parable from Jesus. He had just given a parable about an unjust judge and a persistent widow, and it said he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to a temple to pray, and one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And the Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. Two men went up to the temple to pray, and one went home justified. Well, there you have it, the moral of the story. Don't be proud or arrogant like the Pharisee, but instead be humble like the tax collector. Except that the Pharisee was actually right. He was not like other people. He is not a thief or a troublemaker or an adulterer. He is definitely not like the tax collectors who works for the Romans and collects taxes from his fellow Jews that help pay for the Roman army's occupation of their land. In fact, when the Pharisee goes on, we realize he is not just right about himself, but he is actually righteous. I fast twice a week, more than necessary. I give 1/10 of my income. A good member. We need more Pharisees. To be righteous, according to the Bible, is to live your life according to the laws of Israel. The better you are keeping the law, the more righteous you are. We don't use the word righteous much anymore. Maybe we should translate it as successful. If you're good at your work, you're righteous, hopefully according to your employer. If you are skilled in a hobby, music, crafts, video gaming, if you're popular at school, we might say that you're talented and socially righteous. So the Pharisee is both right. He is not like other people, and righteous, for he has been very successful in living his faith. But he is not, Jesus said, justified. The tax collector, we assume, is pretty much the opposite. We assume he's a failure at keeping the law. No one would call him righteous. Most of his neighbors, off of whom he makes a living, probably dislike him extremely. And he knows this, so he stands at the edge of the temple. Or, if he were here today, he would sit somewhere and try to be inconspicuous. And he doesn't lift his eyes toward heaven, but simply asks for mercy. And Jesus says, this is the one who is justified. Well, righteousness appears to be something we accomplish, about our success. And we We are justified simply because God says so. You know, that kind of runs along all the moral teachings that we have. Is what is not important, what? When children get into trouble, which occasionally happens, they can be unkind and selfish, but they are still beloved. And we who are far from perfect parents or aunts and uncles or whatever can manage this, then how not much so more will God. The Pharisee leads a blameless life, and so for this reason is righteous. The tax collector does not lead a blameless life, but asks God for mercy and asks God to judge him, not based on what he has done, but based on who God is, compassionate, loving, and merciful. This makes this parable kind of difficult. You read it straightforward, it would say, well, don't be like the self-righteous Pharisee, but instead be humble like the tax collector. We might as end up saying, God, we thank you that we are not like other people, hypocrites, overly pious, self-righteous, or even like that Pharisee. We come to church each week, we listen attentively, we have made our stewardship pledge, and we have learned that we should always be humble. We may be righteous, but we're not justified. Because success, righteousness, is never enough. Because it's based on our abilities and accomplishments. And, you know, sooner or later, all of us fall short. And even more so, it's based on comparisons. Righteousness and success always have to be measured against how are the people doing around us. The Pharisee can't escape this, and neither can we. I ran across the name Asina O'Neill this last week. Never heard of her before, but a few years ago, she did a rather strange thing. She's a native of Australia, and she had developed quite an online presence. She had 200,000 followers on YouTube and 500,000 on Instagram. This is money. And then she quit. She vacated the social media that had made her a star. She was successful across multiple social media platforms, but it was not enough. And she felt like it was not enough because it was based on comparisons. Without realizing it, she wrote, I'm quitting Instagram, YouTube, and Tumblr, deleted over 2,000 photos that serve no real purpose other than self-promotion. I've spent the majority of my teenage life being addicted to social media, social approval, and social status, and my physical appearance. Social media, especially as how I've used it, isn't real. It's a two-dimensional world. It's contrived images and edited clips ranked against each other. It's a system based on social approval, validation and views, success and followers. It's perfectly orchestrated, self-absorbed judgment. I was consumed by it. And she realized this and quit. She realized something that many of us never figure out, that no matter what we accomplish or how successful we are, there's always more. There's always more we could have done. There's always someone else who has done more than we have. And there's always a sense of doubt. How do we know we're good enough, rich enough, successful enough, pretty enough, popular enough, have enough good grades? How do we know whether we're righteous enough? Which may be the secret of being a Christian or even a person, is not to strive for righteousness or even humility. Not successful or a failure, rich or poor, any of the things we can put on a scale and measure and compare, but instead to simply receive God's acceptance, love, and mercy. Recognize recognizing that we're always in need. No matter what you've done or not done, we all have needs. And the minute you recognize that you can ask God to meet them, giving up hope of creating your perfect life, giving up the need to compare ourselves to others, and instead just receive God's love and acceptance like a child receives the love of her parents. When you do that, you recognize your need, you discover God has already called you righteous and holy and beloved and perfect. That is, God has justified you. Growing up, I, like many of you, was taught about sin, breaking God's laws. You know the old story of what happened in church today. Well, that was the sermon. What was it about? Well, it was about sin. Well, what did the preacher say? Well, he was against it. That's what we say. You know, missing the mark. Remember the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sermon on the Mount. Remember the 7 deadly sins. Remember the golden rule. Remember the failure to act. But all of these are only partial definitions of sin. Sin is a refusal to become fully human. It's closing my heart to other people, to creation, to evolving creation. It's anything that interferes with me opening my whole heart to God, to others, to nature. It's kind of a disconnection from life. It's the opposite of creativity. It's the opposite of abundance. It's the opposite of coherence. It's the opposite of flourishing. It is like a walking death. My life, precious to God, dying because I'm a sinner. You may enjoy the writings of Richard Rohr. He said it's not addition that makes one holy, but subtraction. Stripping the illusions, letting go of pretense, exposing the false sense, and breaking open the heart, and not taking my private life too seriously. David Thomas said when Jesus exposed this parable, he exposed the Pharisees' compulsive need to avoid his broken inner life by policing the outer boundaries, deciding who's in and who's out, based on his own definition of purity and piety. Well, it's easy for us in our day to look down on his arrogance, but we're kind of the same, or can be. We behave sometimes as if we're finished products, nothing new to discover about the Holy Spirit as it moves upon our lives. And if you admit it, you may set up religious litmus tests for each other based on your personal inclinations and pieties that have nothing to do with Jesus' open-hearted love and hospitality. You know, I've many times gotten the stink eye from somebody because of some of my religious views. I wasn't maybe enough old-time religion for them or conservative enough for them. And they thought that I was really in the wrong and probably my soul was in jeopardy. Quite a bit of difference between Jesus' open-hearted love and hospitality. Well, Jesus doesn't end his parable with an explanation of what happens to both these men. He doesn't say, the tax collector went home and sinned no more. In fact, we have no idea what he does. Maybe he kind of went on with his life and then came back the next week and asked for forgiveness again. We have no idea if he does anything to justify God's mercy toward him. That's precisely the point, because the mercy of God cannot be earned. It can only be received. Confession is opening up to our empty hands and receiving the mercy of God. Two men go up to the temple to pray. One prays, the other weeps. One self-protects, the other surrenders. One catalogs, the other confesses. God hears both prayers. Both men had a prayer that was heard. But only the honest and desperate prayer of confession changes a life. Being justified means God brings us into a healthy relationship with God. We can do that, all of us, if we will make room in our lives for mercy. If we are willing to be open to God loving us absolutely, without trying to prove anything. That is, on the surface, something that's really easy to do. But in our self-serving ways and concern about our egos and our pride, it becomes really hard to do that. But this is a day we have gone up to the temple to worship. And may our prayer be simply,